Many of us grew up with a very specific story of the British Empire. It is often described as a noble, civilizing force, the power that built the world's railways, spread a global system of law, and ultimately took the lead in ending the slave trade. But right before colonies gained their independence, British officials carried out a massive, coordinated effort to ensure that only the positive parts of that story survived. In government offices across the globe, they began pulling files and destroying the evidence of what had actually happened on the ground. This project, Operation Legacy, reached 37 colonies, targeting over 8,000 files of documented torture and massacres. The methods were final. Records were incinerated, dropped in the ocean, or shipped back to a secret London archive for 60 years. Because of this, the history we were taught is effectively the history that the empire allowed to remain. To find the truth, we have to look at the 10 files they tried to destroy. File 10 begins in Manchester in 1819, when thousands of British citizens gathered peacefully to protest for voting rights. The government deployed soldiers on horseback to charge into the crowd. 15 people were killed and hundreds injured in what became known as the Peterloo Massacre. Rather than admitting to the violence, the government immediately defended the soldiers and worked to suppress newspapers, preventing the public from seeing that the state had used lethal force against its own citizens. File 9 covers the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. While the empire is often praised for this move, the records show they used £20 million of ordinary taxpayer money. The financial relief was for the owners. The newly freed people received no compensation at all, while the full brutality of the plantation system was quietly downplayed in official accounts. These early events in Britain and the Caribbean demonstrated how the state could use legal and financial power to protect elites and manage public perception, a strategy that would be refined as the empire expanded. File 8 takes us to the Boer War at the start of the 20th century. The British military moved Boer women and children into concentration camps, where over 26,000 died from disease and neglect. When an activist named Emily Hobhouse exposed these conditions, officials worked to discredit her as an agitator and withheld the most damning medical reports to keep the British public from turning against the war. File 7 reveals chemical weapons use in the 1920s. To suppress a revolt in Iraq, the military deployed poison gas against local villages. Winston Churchill personally authorized the use of these weapons, yet the specifics of the gas attacks remained absent from mainstream history books for nearly a century. In both cases, the response followed a consistent logic: classify the field reports, isolate the whistleblowers, and maintain the public image of a necessary, civilized war. File 6 concerns the Bengal famine of 1943. While India was under British rule, Churchill's wartime government diverted food supplies away from the region to build up stockpiles elsewhere. The result was the death of approximately 3 million people. While the suffering reached the scale seen in this photograph, the British government publicly blamed the famine on the war and local mismanagement. File 5 is the 1948 Batang Kali massacre in Malaya. Scots Guard soldiers shot 24 unarmed Chinese villagers and then claimed the men were communist fighters attempting to escape. The government conducted brief, internal investigations that were essentially cover-ups, blocking proper inquiries and denying the families an apology for over 60 years. These records show how effectively the state could hide mass loss of life, either by framing it as an unavoidable consequence of war or by labeling innocent victims as enemy insurgents. File 4 involved the Chagos Islands in the 1960s. The British government forcibly removed the entire population to make room for a U.S. military base, legally lying about the residents by claiming they were just temporary workers with no right to the land. Files 3 and 2 document the Mau Mau uprising in 1950s Kenya. The British ran a massive detention system. Over 1 million people were held in camps like this one, facing systematic beatings and abuse. At Hola Camp, guards beat 11 men to death. British officials immediately issued a public statement claiming the men had died from drinking contaminated water. File 1 contains the documents proving the cover-up went to the highest levels. The files show the Attorney General in Kenya had secretly changed the law to make physical beatings legal, and the governor had actively helped hide the evidence from the public. To preserve the image of law and order, the empire institutionalized torture, adjusted the law to accommodate it, and then attempted to burn the paperwork. These secret archives remained undisturbed for decades, until 2011, when a group of elderly survivors from the Kenyan camps brought a legal challenge against the British government. It was this specific legal pressure from the survivors that finally forced the government to admit to the existence of the hidden Operation Legacy files and open the vaults. While the UK government was ultimately forced to pay compensation to the survivors, they have stopped short of issuing a full, formal apology for the atrocities documented in the files. This history reminds us that the British Empire didn't simply leave behind a legacy. They spent years actively manufacturing one by trying to incinerate the evidence of their crimes. In the end, history is not just a record of what happened. It is the story that remains after those in power have decided what is and isn't worth burning.